Yes, who was it?
Sir Vaishnavi, can you please share the document?
Are you unable to read it from here?
I have a little difficulty, sir.
Okay, should I paste this thing in the chat box?
Yes, sir, that will be fine.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I am pasting this in the chat box.
Bye.
Okay, so it seems that I can't paste this long, so I'll paste it paragraph wise. Vaishnavi, can you see it now in the chat box?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Okay, guys. You know what to do once you have read the passage. You have to raise your hand. And I see some people in the waiting room. Let me admit them. Okay. Um, the time is already over. Please take a little more time, 30 more seconds. I want all of you to raise your hand so that all of you have read it. And guys, at least while you are answering, please turn on your video. That will allow me to understand whether my explanations are making sense to you. Okay, so there are a few people who have not read it yet. Aditi Sanjay, Aditya Shankar, Ashik, Dhanush, Keshav, Nakul, Nand, Nitisha, Nrupala, Pratyush, Rohan, Sanjay, Shreya, Siddhant,
Finished. I
Sumita.
raised my hand.
Sorry.
Sir, I finished that time itself. I raised my hand.
Okay. Nrupala, I can't see your hand, but can you raise it again?
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Sanjay, can you turn on your video for a minute? Sanjay? Okay. One thing Sanjay is here. Okay. Okay, guys. So mm, we we have read this passage, and this passage is one of the classical defense in tort law, voluntary non-fit injuria, which means if you are voluntarily taking a risk, the injury is something that you rightly deserve, and hence you cannot claim a compensation. So, first of all, we will need to understand the concept of a defense in order to appreciate what voluntary non-fit injuria entails. So, a defense is something that frees you of punishment from the offense that you have committed. So, let's say if I take your pencil, but I had a rightful reason to take your pencil, I may still be liable for the offense of stealing, but I'll not be punished for the same, which means that any offense that I commit, and if I have a defense, I cannot be given the punishment for that offense. It is as simple as that. It's imagine the classical scenario where you were holed up in your principal's office because you have beaten someone out, and that person who you have beaten has gone to the principal with your complaint. And what do you say in return? You tell your principal how that person has initiated the fight. It was, in fact, the other person who has started beating someone else, or perhaps you. And as a result of which, you have started beating him back as a consequence. Now, what are you doing? You are essentially taking a defense. So, I see a lot of new people joining, and I'm really not happy with people joining this late because this leads to people missing out on a lot of important discussion. Hi, Roshni, just joined. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so what I was telling you that every time someone makes us guilty or someone complains anything about us, we always take a defense. If it's your mother who tells you that you have not done a particular thing, you can take the defense that you had other important things to do. That is you taking a defense. What is the function of taking a defense? The function of taking a defense is to get exempted from the punishment. Let's say your mother asked you to probably clean your room, and you did not clean your room. Now, obviously, in a normal setting with no exception, you will get some scolding for not cleaning the room. That is the punishment for the offense of not cleaning the room. But if you can tell your mother that you had a really important assignment which has taken a lot of your time, and in fact all of your time, and hence left you no opportunity to clean your room, does that exempt you from the punishment that is scolding? Yes, that does. So that is a defense. The same thing happens in a legal setting. In a legal setting, what happens is every time there is an offense that is committed, the offender, if the first thing that he will do, he will negate the very fact that the offense has been committed. He will say that, okay, no offense has been committed. But he is unsuccessful in that. He will perhaps say that even if the offense was committed, it was not committed by me. But if he fails there, he will start taking the next offense or next thing. That is to say, defense, oh, I had a valid reason to commit that offense. So again, imagine the same situation. You have dropped a glass of water on the floor. Okay, that is an offense. But the first time your mother confronts you, you'll say, okay, where is water? I have not dropped anything. Okay, first thing, where is the water? There is no water on the floor because water is transparent. You can see the flow. You'll try to just fool your people into it. But then, while it is very clear that there is water on the floor, the next thing you will say, okay, I have not done it. Someone else has done it. But assume that also fails. Your mother knows that it was only you have done it. Then what do? You will say, okay, it was my mistake. You were doing something else and it inevitably happened. Something on the same line. So an offender also goes through these three different stages, not all of the time, but most of the time. And that third ultimate last stage is the stage of taking a defense. When you accept that you have indeed committed the offense, but you had a legitimate reason for committing that offense. So this is the theory of defense. Now coming back to this specific defense of voluntary non-fit injuria. The crux of this defense is that you knew some sort of an offense was going to take place, or there is a risk of this particular thing happening, and still you undertook to do that. So if something or the other happens, you will not be, or the person who is operating that subsystem will not be liable for it. So assume that thing. How many of you know about bungee jumping? Because okay, two out of two people who are on camera are showing their hands. I assume they most of you are familiar with bungee jumping. So every time people go for jumping, they are made to sign a consent form. So if something unforeseen happens, or God forbid if people die during the bungee jumping, they cannot hold the operator of the bungee jumping platform liable for it. Why do they do so? Because by undertaking the act of bungee jumping, we are inherently accepting the risk that are associated with the act of bungee jumping. Now, the same thing is something that when people are getting or keep starting an operation, they are also made to sign a consent form, and that can be for even a simple operation like when let's say, what can be a simple operation? Simple operation can be just fixing teeth, for example. A dentist may just take your teeth out. That's a very simple operation that does not pose a lot of risk, but still your consent is taken. But even if that consent were not to be taken, even then if something unforeseen happens, you cannot hold the doctor liable for that. Okay, why? Because by undertaking that operation, you undertook that risk as well. This is the concept of voluntary non-fit injury. Please lower your hand, and only those people who have any doubt in the concept of voluntary non-fit injury can raise their hand, so that I can take their doubts. Yeah, Advait, go ahead and
Yes,
come
sir.
on video if you can.
Yeah, one second. Can you see me? Okay.
Yeah, I can see you
Yeah.
perfectly well.
Yeah. So like even after that, right, there are still cases where like people do litigate for like bungee jumping, and if there's a failed surgery and all, right? So how does that work?
So
Like,
people, there is no embargo on you litigating, but the operator will always claim this defense, right? Every time a defense is taken, a defense is taken in a court of law. So we presume that people will come and litigate, but that is something that the offender will say, okay, I accept that the offense happened. I accept that I was the reason of why that offense happened, but at the same time, he consented to that offense having taken place. So that is what I'll tell in the court.
then they won't get any compensation or anything, right?
Yes, then that person will not get any compensation.
But then like I think there are like cases where people actually get compensation for like if like the equipment fails or something like that.
Correct. So what do you okay, so let's say in the example that I told you, you are going to a dentist to get your teeth out. Advait, when you were 2-year old or when you were 3-year old, you started eating a lot of chocolates that led to your teeth getting rotten. Even after your second set of teeth came, the same problem persisted, and you had several teeth of yours rotten. Okay, so please do not laugh in my class, otherwise people will get scared. Okay, don't laugh.
Yeah. No.
Yes. Okay, nice. So what happened in that case is that when you're consenting to that operation, you are consenting that the person who is operating on you will know the basics of dental surgery, right? He will be a graduate of dentistry, that he will have the necessary qualification to operate on you, and that he will take all the reasonable care. And out of, despite that, if something happens, you are not going to claim compensation. But even if these two things are not met, then obviously you can get compensation. If let's say someone had a fraudulent certificate of dentistry when he was not really the dentist, then obviously he might have some kind of professional difficulty operating upon you. Or if they were not using the standard equipment, where let's say equipment A was needed, they were using equipment B, you did not undertake the risk of a faulty operation. You undertook the risk of a legitimate operation. So that is the difference. So people, when do they get compensation? They get compensation when they have, let's say they have been affected by something, the risk of which they have not undertaken. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sumedha, do you also have a doubt? Okay. Does anyone have still any doubt? I took a lot of time in explaining you this concept because this is something that you might have other use of in your other law entrance examination, where voluntary non-fit injuria questions have come time and again. With that in mind, I'll move on to the first question. The same process will continue. You'll have to give me the answer to the first question privately in the chat box.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, who is this?
Sir, I'm Ananya. I can't see all the options. If you could just like.
Sure. I'll just ensure that you can see. Can you see them now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, people, come online, come on video, please. Otherwise, Nishka will also go in some time. Thank you for honoring my request. Okay. Guys, all of you should answer. There are 36 of you, 34 students, and I've gotten 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Only 10 answers. This is very dismal and disappointing. Okay. Yashwant, what is your answer?
I think it is A.
A. And why is it so?
Because he was asked to drive fast.
Okay, because he was
So
asked to drive
it
fast.
was his intention.
Okay. Okay. So let's break this down. I see a lot of you have answered A, B, C. There is almost an equal division between A, B, C. So I realize that this is quite a confusing question because around 2/3 of you are wrong. 2/3 of the people who have answered, which is actually 1/3 of the class. So 1/3 of 2/3, that is 2/9 of the, sorry, 1/9 of the class is correct, and the 8/9, that is more than 82% of my class is wrong. So that's a pretty distressing fact. So let's get to it. Ram was in a hurry to get to the airport to catch a plane, and he hires a taxi. Okay. Now he hires a taxi and he asks the driver to drive fast. Understandable. The driver starts driving fast, rather reluctantly. What is the speed limit? The speed limit is 60 km per hour. What is the speed that the driver drives at? 8 times 80 km per hour. That is 20 km per hour over the speed limit. Okay. So he's driving at 80 km per hour. Now, by the time, okay, let's understand this one by one. At the time that you enter into a taxi, what is the risk that you assume? The risk that you assume when you enter into a taxi is the risk of getting injured from an accident in the normal course of driving. Okay. So let's say you expect the taxi driver to follow all rules and regulations, right? We'll accept that the taxi is in a working condition. There are no faulty equipments loaded into the taxi, right? That is a normal assumption that you will make, a reasonable main standard. So that is something that we will understand. By the way, one important thing that I thought I'll tell my class. Recently, NLS gave inaugurating or first lecture to its batch, and that lecture has been put on YouTube. So that has been taken by a foremost legal scholar of the country. While that is not very pertinent to a CLET studies, but people out of interest can watch that lecture that is on YouTube. That will give you a nice insight into law in general. So out of interest, if you have any time over the Diwali holidays, please do watch it. Most of you will not get to come to analysts, and that's a statistical fact. So that's the best way you will get to attend some of the lectures. And I'm just trying to be rude because sometimes being rude can motivate people. While I hope that all of you reach NLS, but statistically, hardly any one of you are going to make it. There are 50,000 aspirants, only 100 are making it to NLS. That is 1 out of 1,000, sorry, 2 out of 1,000, or 1 out of 500 people. And we have just 36 people in class. So statistically, a part of one person is going to make it to NLS. So please do watch that lecture. Now coming back to this again. You go into a taxi, you assume the risk of a normal accident that can happen during the course of normal driving. When you say that you should drive fast, what do you mean? Do you ask the driver to break rules and regulations? Yes or no?
No.
No?
I mean, I think that this just means that he's asking him to go a little faster, not at 20 times this. It's not. I don't know. Why would your driver break the rules that bad and then go crash and all that?
Yes. Yes. In fact, even when, okay, in a different situation, this time, because what do we do as a human society? We do not take traffic violations that seriously. And this is why this question becomes a little confusing. But at times, when you say someone, let's say if there is a elder brother of mine and I get into a fight with my friends and one of my friends thrashes me, and I tell my elder brother that that guy has thrashed me, please will you teach him a lesson? And he says, okay, I'll teach him a lesson. Am I asking him to do something illegal? Because then let's say he goes and kills that person. Can I be motivated for having abating the murder of that friend of mine? No, right? Because I just said teach him a lesson. Similarly, when you say someone to drive fast, you are not asking them to violate any law. So if there was a speed limit of 60 km per hour, there could be a situation where the driver was just driving at 30 km per hour and you just wanted to reach to the airport at time. So you just ask the driver to drive fast. And imagine yourself in a situation when you take an Ola and Uber, you normally ask the driver ki bhaiya jaldi chalo, bhaiya drive fast. And this is something that we usually do. We do not ask them to break traffic rules. We do not ask them to jump red lights. And if they do, that is that their company and they will be liable for it. This explanation makes sense to all of you? Okay. If it does not, either come on video and nod your head or raise your hand or unmute yourself. These are the three options you have. You can nod like this while on video. You can raise your hand.
I
Yes.
just have a question. So
Yes.
it sort of is slightly dependent on the wording that is used, right?
Mhm.
Like if you're just urging him, okay, like you gave an example of the, teach him a lesson thing, right? But if it was a little more specific, like, beat him up, but the guy ends up dying. So you didn't intend for him to die, but that was the consequence of what you said. So will that qualify as?
Okay, so if I say beat him up and he goes and beats him up and he beats him up though that bad, yes, I ask him to violate a law. Beating him up or beating someone up is against the law. So I can be held liable, yes.
Mhm. Okay.
But here driving fast is not against the law.
Yeah, obviously.
Driving over 60 km per hour, which can be pretty slow for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yes, that is against the law. So we are left with two options, B and C. How will we determine which is the correct option between B and C? The taxi company would be liable because the driver ought not to have exceeded the speed limit, or the taxi company would be liable because driving fast should only mean driving within the speed limits prescribed by the law. I think the C options describes the reasoning that I have given so far more appropriately than the B. Okay, because the bone of contention is this phrase, driving fast. And if this is the bone of contention, C explains it quite beautifully, and hence C is the right answer. Okay, so I know a lot of you have given me the right answer, and most of you have given me the wrong answer. But I hope this has clarified. If it is not, please just use one of those three options. Going to the second question. Okay, time's over. Let me go to Pratiksha. Where is Pratiksha? Hi Pratiksha, can you hear me? Can you unmute yourself? Come on
Yes,
video.
sir. Yeah, I'm on video.
Already. Oh, great, great. Thanks a lot. What is your answer and why?
I think it's D because it doesn't like it's not a very like just saying that you don't like someone from some place is not a very good ground of putting a trespass action against them, because it's their opinion. Like it might have hurt your feelings, but she didn't do anything to her personally.
Okay.
That's what I think. So I think it's
Okay.
D.
What does D? What is the reasoning of D? What does it mean?
It means that like trifles are things that don't have much importance. And I
Mhm.
think this whole fact, none of it makes like it's not that important that they need to get they need to get law involved. So that's why I think it's D. 'Cause
Okay. 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 Mm, Pratiksha, one thing, and for all of you have chosen D, one thing that we should keep in mind is that in comprehension-based passage, earlier we used to have legal principle given to us, and then we were given fact situation. But in this new setting, we will be given principle in the form that we have to derive it from the entire comprehension set of the passage that we have been given. Does the passage anywhere? See, all of you have given me either A or D as the answer. So we know that Mira is not going to succeed. The fact that she is trying to say that Shelja is a trespasser is something that the law will not allow. The only thing that we need to determine is whether A is the right option or D is the right option. Now, the reasoning will depend on partly on the passage that we have been given. Does the passage talks to us about anything regarding truffles or trivialities? No, it does not. It talks about waiving of right that we give when we give consent for something to happen. The same way Mira, when she consented for Shelja to come to her home, she waived some rights, right? That is what the passage talks to us about. So when we are confused between A and D or any options which gives us the same result but different reasonings, we have to try to attune that answer to the passage. Okay, Pratiksha, does it make sense?
yes, sir, I got it.
Okay. So does
Excuse
anyone?
me, sir.
Yes, Nishka.
Also, the question says that she is suing her on the grounds of trespass, which is unlawfully entering a place, not because of the comment she made. So I think on that grounds, you can also rule out option B.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's not because of what she said. It's kind of unrelated. How can you she herself threw her out of the house, and then you're telling that she trespassed? Amen.
Yes, it's and that's why Mira will lose, right? Okay. Yes, there are always multiple. Nishka, you are right. There are multiple ways of ruling out a wrong answer, but there is only one way to reach the right answer. So yes, what you say also makes sense. Uh, Going to the third question. Okay, so it's a fairly straightforward question, and uh, all of you have given me the right answer. It's A. Ayushi consented to the injury and thus cannot blame others. Why? Because firstly, she did not know the injury, but then the commanding officer told her what the injury, what the possibilities are, and then she expressly consented to it. So since she has consented to the injury, she cannot blame others. Uh, and A is the correct answer. Okay, moving to question number 4. Okay, we have to refer to the facts. So, Akash, Advait, guys, can you come on camera?
Yes.
Pratiksha, you've been here. Can you come back? Thanks. Thanks a lot. Oh, great. Who else am I missing? People, anyone can come on camera. I just taking names of the people who are generally fine on camera. Roshni, Roshni, can you come on camera, please? Yashwant. Thanks. Nand. Oh, Nand, you have some problems today. Megha. And anyone who I have forgotten to name, please, if you can, please do come. Okay, guys. So the facts are almost the same as the above facts, only that now Ayushi was a bit reluctant and she has agreed to fly under pressure. So there are two possible answers that are either B and D that I have been given. I'll go to Advait and ask him why he
I
thinks.
changed it to D. I by mistake I put B first, but I go through the all four. Like the moment I went through D, I changed it to D.
Okay. Rohan, why do you think B is the right answer? Nrupla,
So,
yes, Nrupla, why do you think B is the right answer?
so I marked B because it was given in the passage that a person not be like influenced or under coercion or pressure and ask them to, I mean, their consent. So that's why I marked B. So.
Okay, so B and D for a normal layperson reeks of the same sentiment that of Ayushi agreeing to something under pressure. But for a legal mind, for a lawyer, words matter a lot, and even fine differences in word can lead to a lot of different consequences. So how is B and D different? And D is the right answer. Why is D the right answer? Because D gives us an explanation related to the passage why Ayushi's consent did not amount to her knowledge, or why Ayushi's consent cannot qualify her to take the defense or cannot qualify the commander to take the defense of Valentine Orphan to Julia. Because Ayushi's mere knowledge of the risk does not amount to consent. So if you read the passage again, you will find that there is a mention that for volatile non-fit injuria to happen, there has to be two things. One is there has to be knowledge of the risk, and second, there has to be free consent. Just because she had knowledge of the risk, but not the free consent, she cannot said to have given a free consent enough to qualify her for voluntary not injury. Therefore, D is a more appropriate choice because D is more or D explains the reason better. That is the reason D is the better choice. Okay. Three options if you have any doubt. otherwise come to 5. Please refer to the facts in 1.4. The situation in 1.4 is an example of okay. So it is an example of senti not fit injuria, where you have the knowledge and you are being made to take the risk. But sure, Megha, you can leave. Now you will say that okay, it's senti non fit injura. B is the right answer. But there are people who have given C to be the right answer, that it is neither voluntary not fit injuria, neither senti non fit injuria. What does senti non fit injuria mean? That mere knowledge of the risk will lead you to assume the risk. Okay, so since she has knowledge, it becomes senti non fit injuria, but senti non fit injuria is not a legal defense. So we just have to identify what is this in the present case. Is it a senti non fit injuria? In which case this defense will not be applicable. But the Latin term senti non fit injuria means the knowledge of the injury. What does voluntary non fit injuria mean? It means voluntarily taking the risk of the injury. That is the meaning of these two Latin terms. In this present case, has she voluntarily taken the risk of the injury, or does she have knowledge of the injury? She just has the knowledge of the injury. So therefore, the right answer is B, senti non fit injuria. Okay. Of the 3 options, I don't think anyone is exercising any of those. It's 5:53 right now. You have 2 minutes, that is till 5:55, to read this passage.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, who is the Vaishnavi? Yeah, sorry.
Yes, sir. I have a doubt regarding a legal theory
Okay.
part. So, one of the defenses to the tort of defamation is privilege, right?
Yes, yes.
So, can you please explain me? I couldn't get the hang of it.
Yes. Can we do it after this passage, because people have started reading this?
Sir, I have a class at 6 o'clock, sir, so I might be leaving it.
Okay. So okay, read this passage, and once we are done reading it, I'll explain.
Okay, sir.
Yes, people, whoever has any kind of commitment, test or a class at 6, please, you can leave. You need not ask me privately.
So is this going to be on the website so that I can check back on it later?
It is being recorded. Yes, guys, you have to raise your hand once you are done reading it. No problem, Siddhant. Okay, guys, 30 more seconds for you to read this. Okay, okay, fine. So someone asked me doubt. Who was the person who asked me about privilege?
So Vaishnavi, it's me.
Yes, Vaishnavi. Hi. So yes, what is privilege? So recently, there was a case where privilege has been. Vaishnavi, what case is it?
Sir, what?
What case are you talking about?
So not the case that I generally was reading, so I
There's
couldn't
been a case
understand.
as well recently. So, defamation is an offense where you're saying untrue things about someone and which also has an unfair amount of force or unfair amount of effect on someone's reputation. So, if I say, for instance, that Akash is a bad student, and if Akash is a good student, then it is going to harm its reputation in the eyes of all of you, right? So, Akash can then sue me for it that I have reduced or lowered his reputation in the eyes of other people. Now, there are several defenses to the offense of defamation. Since we are talking about defenses, it was a very pertinent question. Some of the defenses of defamation is one, truth. If I can somehow prove that Akash is indeed a bad student, then he can have no cause of action against me. Second, if I can prove that I had a reasonable ground to believe that Akash is a bad student. So if there is someone who I really, really trusted, let's say Nishka came and told me, sir, Akash is a bad student. And I go on telling the world that Akash is a great bad student, then perhaps I may not be liable for defamation because I had a valid reason to believe. So whatever I was saying, I was believing or I was under the impression that it is a true fact. So Akash, thank you for coming online, bad student. Uh, then there is another defense and a defense that is not so well known, that is the defense of privilege, and privilege is only available to member of parliament and member of legislative assemblies or legislative council. So any house where rules and laws are made, there is often a discussion. So parliamentarians or members of that house ask the relevant government or the ministers of that government several questions. Now, to ensure that discussions therein are free and does not have any degree of interference from the outside, members of those houses are given the privilege of saying anything, and anything that they say in the house cannot be taken to a court of law to say that they have said something wrong for me. So if I go to the House of the Parliament and on the Lok Sabha TV, I say to the world that Akash is a bad student, when Akash is in fact a great student, Akash cannot do anything to me. And why is that our defense, the defense of privilege? Because if someone were to hamper this free flow of communication, we might not have free discussion, which forms the bedrock of democracy. So this is where the defense of privilege is rooted in. Does it answer your question, Vaishnavi, or you have already left? Oh, you are still
No,
there.
sir, I'm still there.
Thank you.
So, what about qualified privilege, sir? Does it do the same work as the absolute one?
Qualified privilege, I'm not sure. I really have no clue. I'll have to look it up and then come back to you.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay.
No, but what if like a situation is where a member of parliament goes out and says that, the head of the Lok Sabha is not capable, like, he's not allowing us to function as we want. Isn't that also defamation? And that is
Uh,
protected by law, right?
yes. No. Sorry. Uh, First of all, privilege only extends to the proceedings of the house. So if you are doing anything outside the house, you are not covered by that defense.
Okay.
Secondly, what you are telling me, the content of your statement is an allegation. Okay. Defamation is something else. Defamation is more of a character attack. It's like saying that the leader of the house is having an affair with the prime minister. This is okay. People are giving me bad looks, but this is a character assassination. This is something that can lower the reputation, right? If we will say that this and this politician is corrupt, it is unlikely to lower his reputation, right? What
Okay.
is then? It's a very subjective thing. So people keep on saying that Vijay Mallya is a fraud. Now he cannot file a case of defamation against every person. But let's say if there is very upright person, and if we go against him and we are the only one who is saying it, then he might file a case against us. So defamation is something very, very personal.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
what is privilege case under Arnab Goswami case, like the Maharashtra Secretary Assembly?
Arnav Goswami case is a different case. It's a breach of privilege. So it's like that Arnav Goswami was addressing Uddhav Thackeray by derogatory words. Now Uddhav Thackeray is is holding a constitutional position of CM of the state. Now you cannot just mock CM on a national television like that, the way Arnav Goswami was doing, and we all know how Arnav Goswami handles things. So Arnav Goswami was in his characteristic way just shouting at Uddhav Thackeray from his newsroom and shouting in a very uncharacteristic or unparliamentary way, and we all know what happened afterwards.
Yes.
That is not to justify what happened to him afterwards, but yes, we all know the saga. Okay, so coming back to this, there have been messages to the fact that people have read it but have not understood it, and this is quite understandable given the complexity of passage and given the complexity of legal language. Legal language and the passages based on legal language are generally difficult to understand. So what is a force majeure clause? A force majeure is something called as a act of God clause in a contract. In a contract, if I tell you that I'm going to ship you 1,000 liters of petrol and you are going to pay me XYZ amount for that petrol, if somehow something outside my control prevents it, and what can be something that is outside my control preventing me from it? Let's say our country goes on for a war. So I am India, you are Pakistan. I have had a contract with you that I'm going to ship you 1,000 liters of petrol in the next day. But now that our country has gone for a war and we have sealed our borders and I have no recourse to send it to you, then I can say that it is a force majeure, which is a major force beyond my control. Force majeure translates to force beyond my control. And if I cannot control anything, you cannot hold me liable for breach of contract. That is as simple as it is. Now, but let's say there is the same contract is there. I am asking you that I'll transport 1,000 liters of petrol to you, but suddenly there is something in the sea seaway between India and Pakistan, and all seaways are closed, all the ports are closed. Okay, because there has been a major oil spill all across the ports of Pakistan, and I cannot transport the oil that I have promised to do over sea. But there is a air route that I can use, but the air route will cost me prohibitively more. So initially, when the cost of transportation was 100 rupees per liter, now it will be, let's say, 10,000 rupees per liter. Obviously, I cannot do it, but still I'll be made to do it because it is not force majeure. Can I still prevent the breach of contract? Yes, I can prevent the breach of contract. So as long as the prevention of breach of contract is in my hand, this is not force majeure. But the moment the breach of contract is not under my control, when the performance of the contract has become impossible, that is what we call force majeure. And why is the heading is force majeure under during COVID-19? Because they have COVID-19 related article, which is not completely given here. So under this COVID-19, a lot of contracts are getting breached because there were thousands of contracts among commercial organizations which asked or which gave people assurance that such and such goods will be delivered in 2020, in 2021. But all of us know that there was a lockdown across the globe. Most of the countries of the globe were under a lockdown during at least the beginning of the April, or in the last week of May. A lot of countries were under lockdown. The domestic boundaries were closed. People could not move even domestically, let alone moving internationally. So a lot of contract got breached, and a lot of people started invoking the force majeure clause because they had no option. If I had promised Europe that I'll transport them 1,000 liters of oil, but their borders are closed, I cannot do anything. This is just beyond my control. I cannot go and meet the prime minister of, let's say, a country in Europe and ask him that please open the border, because if you do not open the border, I'll not be able to perform my part of the contract. He'll just ask me to go away because I cannot. He will not obviously put his country on the risk of a coronavirus infection just because I have to perform some contract. Something like this cannot happen. Similarly, there are other situations, not just war and COVID-19, not just the closure of border. There are several other things. Let's say I had an opium or anything. Let's say I had a tomato farm, and it is only my region in the country, let's say Madhya Pradesh, where I live right now, which was growing tomatoes. And I have contacted to a businessman in Bombay who is producing tomato ketchup, that I'll transport them tomatoes worth this and this. But there is a famine in my locality. I cannot do anything. This is a force which is outside my control. So I'll obviously breach the contract, but he cannot claim the damages from me because the breaching of the contract is not under my control. But however, if I could have procured the tomatoes from some other place, then I can be made liable. If there was an option to deliver on my commitment, there would have been a chance that I could have been made liable for damages. So that is what is being talked about in the second passage, which talks about prevention. With these ideas, number 2.1.
So what is NGT?
National Green Tribunal. They have been in news recently. Are you not following the newspaper, Roshan?
Yeah, Justice.
Yeah, I know.
Ban
Cracker.
of crackers.
I don't know. It sounded familiar, but I forgot the full form.
Because you are not following the newspaper diligently. That's why it just sounds familiar and you do not know it. Okay, are you sad, Roshni? Okay, no, you are smiling. Yeah. Please give me the answer privately in the chat box. I can see some of your answers. 2 answers have already come. Where are the rest of you? Okay, Akash, what do you think is the answer and why?
No, sir, I changed it to C. Because
My question is, what do you think the answer is and why?
it's C, I think,
Okay, and why?
because NGT orders just stopped the company to procure materials. So it's beyond
Yes.
their control. It's beyond their control to.
Yes. So first thing that we know should understand: can JBM perform on its promise? No, they cannot perform on its promise. Is there a reason beyond their control? Yes, this is a reason that is beyond their control. And what is that reason? That reason is an NGT order. Okay, so if NGT order is beyond their control, they can seek the benefit of a force majeure clause, and hence C is the right answer. Okay. Uh, 2.2. Simple question. If you read it properly, okay. Ananya, why do you think A is the right answer?
So because they have said that because of the NGT order, the construction was stopped and the circumstances was beyond their control. So obviously JBM is entitled to that extension for force majeure reasons.
Okay. Okay. Nand, what's your explanation? Nand, I can't hear you. Okay. Okay, guys. Very feebly.
Better now, sir?
Perfect.
Yeah, so I went with A because the 2 months for raw materials, and I don't think the company expected them to deliver on the complete construction within 2 months. So they require the 2 months for the construction as well.
Okay. Okay. So the bone of contention here is that we all know that they are entitled to extension. The only thing that we need to determine is whether they are entitled to 2 months of construction or 2 months of extension because the time that is required for construction, or the 4 months of extension, that is the time required for 2 months of construction plus 2 months of procurement in the reverse order. So we will have to understand that what applying these things and just keeping the impracticality of the situation aside, force majeure is something where we have to uh, force majeure is something that where we have to see what could have been prevented and what could not have been prevented. What was the ban upon? What activity was prohibited during the course of the ban?
Construction
Only
activity.
construction.
Construction. Was procurement banned?
No.
Was procurement prohibited?
No.
So if they had contracted for construction, procurement of raw material was a necessary part of the contract, right? So if you were to construct someone, you will obviously have to procure the raw material. Now, since construction was prohibited, you can go ahead and procure raw material. Okay, so they can only be they can only get such amount of extension that was for an activity that was prohibited because of the ban, that is only 2 months. They cannot be entitled for 4 months of extension, because 2 months for procurement of raw material is something that they cannot be allowed, because that was not banned in the first place. Now obviously this seems a lot impractical vis-a-vis business or commercial consideration, that when you are not even allowed in the first place to construct something, why would you procure raw materials? But as far as the direct application of force majeure principle goes, you cannot then do this. So similarly, I can be a company, I have taken a lot of money from someone saying that I'll construct this, and then there is a ban in construction, and they, when the ban is lifted, they come to me again, and then I say, okay, because there was a ban in construction, I have sold off all my machinery, now I'll take 10 years to get all my plants ready. I can't take that argument, right? I can only take okay, I promised you that I'll construct this bridge in 6 months, because initially 2 months was the activity was prohibited. I can take 2 more months, so I'll take 8 months to construct all of it. But I cannot say that now because of the ban I have not done something, I'll have to do it all over again from the scratch, the thing that wasn't prohibited, and then I'll take such and such amount of time. That is completely unjustifiable. So the right answer becomes B.
Sir, in B, 2 months is not written, I think. Like, there's
But
no two there, it's just
what is
one.
the thing that is
It
written?
says months.
Yeah. So
Yes,
I think that's a
How
question
many
mistake.
months?
entitled to months of extension for they could have taken steps to mitigate the delay. Okay, so I
That's
gave
it.
some mistake.
Yeah.
It's such many months of extension will be, so how much, howsoever delay that was bound to happen, and how the delay that was bound to happen minus the amount that could have gone into mitigation is the amount of time that they are entitled to. So JBM is entitled to such months of extension for they could have taken the steps to mitigate the delay. Okay. So yes, there was a typographical error which might have led you to rule out B. Okay, but B is the right answer. Okay, going to question number 3. Please refer to the facts in 2.1. All of us know what the facts are. So someone came online, please, whoever came, please come back. Please accede to my desperate please. Anyway, 2.3. Thank you, Advait. Okay, Nan, what is your answer?
I went with C, sir.
Yes, by?
there was a line in the passage that says you can't use expenses as a you can't use inability of finance or funds to you can't cite that as a reason basically.
Okay. So how is C the right answer then?
Oh, I didn't even read the option properly. I just saw cost and I marked it.
Okay, no problem. Okay. D is the right answer because mere difficulty to perform is not a force majeure. As I have told you that in the India-Pakistan example, if the sea route is somehow not available, I'll have to transport it through air because I've committed to transfer it, regardless of the fact that costs have become prohibitive. Okay, let's go to 2.4.
So isn't it kind of similar?
Yes, similar, but in 2.3, we had some laborers, they were charging high, but in 2.4, we have no laborers.
Okay.
Okay, so all of you have given the right answer. The right answer is A, that JBM should be given the extension as the delay was caused due to circumstances beyond their control. That is a perfectly right answer because since there are no laborers in the locality, they cannot be expected to just carry on the construction work because if there are no resources, how can someone do it? So next and the final question. Oh, there are two more questions. What's your answer for 2.5? Okay, guys. For this question, there is a slight technical thing that you should remember. So the right answer is B, and only Pratiksha has given me that answer. that JBM should be given an extension for everyone else situated in the same position as them stopped construction. Now, this may confuse you, all of you, but let's go back to the passage and let's locate where this is written. So, can you read the highlighted part? I'll just, okay, I can't. I'll just zoom it out. If the difficulty was due to circumstances outside a party's control and was so great that no reasonable person in similar circumstances would be likely to overcome it, then that might be an exception. So in this case, the Builders Association, which is a reasonable person in similar circumstances, they have taken the blame upon themselves. So since no reasonable person in similar circumstance, because the cost have become 10 times high, are likely to overcome it, then this may become an exception. So this is the only thing that makes you take that is another addition, in which case you can take the defense of force majeure. So JVM should be given an extension for everyone else situated in the same position as them stopped construction. Does it make sense to all of you? It was a slightly tricky question. Yes, Roshni.
No, never mind. I got it.
Okay. 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 2.6. Okay. So in this case, who is adopting a ban? It is a Delhi Development Authority. It's a government organization that has decided to ban all construction activity. Is it the same organization as a private environmental group? No. In the previous example, we had an umbrella organization which comprised of everyone who was private. But in this case, JVM cannot be compared to a government authority. So JVM should not be given any extension as they are not situated similarly as the Delhi Development Authority. Delhi Development Authority is on a different footing altogether. It is a government organization. So we have to see reasonable, similarly situated person and not dissimilarly situated person. So that wraps up our second passage. We'll come to the third passage in a while. I want all of you to take a couple of minutes break. It's 6:29. It would have been a lot for you so far. So you can take this opportunity to drink some water or to use restroom, anything. Please take this 2 minutes as a break, and please keep drinking water during classes, because oftentimes legal classes may turn boring, or just any class can turn boring, and that drinking water will keep you out of your slumber. So please keep drinking water and take this opportunity to do so.
Sir, I have another class at 6:30. I need to leave.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So what is 2.6 answer? I was not able to hear.
Which one? 2.6 is D.
2.6.
D. Okay. So I'll be back in
Thank you,
a
sir.
couple of minutes, 6:30. So there is a break until 6:32. Yes, guys, are all of you back? I think all of you are. Okay. Okay. Passage 3, a little bit big. So take 3 minutes to read it.
Sir, I can't see the entire passage.
Okay, I'll just scroll it up after. Is the lower part not visible or the upper part?
The lower part.
Okay, I'll scroll it up after a time. Let me know when I have to scroll it up. You guys read a little faster. Okay. Uh, Only a few of you have read it. Frustration is very similar to force majeure, but the difference in frustration and force majeure is a very minute one. While majeure is part of frustration of contract, so every time there is a force majeure, it's kind of the contract has gotten frustrated. But force majeure can be something as simple as someone dying or something getting lost. So if I tell you that I'll probably give you a mobile phone or sell you my mobile phone and my mobile phone is destroyed, then this is something which will result in a force majeure clause, frustration of the contract, but is not force majeure. Force majeure impedes something differently, whereas frustration just goes to the root of the contract and the contract becomes impossible. But both of them are completely interrelated, and sometimes the contract can get both frustrated and hit by a force majeure. At the same time, frustration is inherent in every contract, whereas a force majeure is something that has to be specified, that whether or not this contract will be hit by a force majeure, whereas frustration is assumed to be inherent in every contract. But the technical and legal difference between force majeure and frustration is not really for you to understand at this point, but we will take on and deal with this concept as we solve the questions. So coming to question 3.1. Answer to 3.1. So we know that the contract is frustrated because no longer can the aircraft come into India and hence the contract has gotten frustrated. It is not void ab initio. Void ab initio would mean that the contract from the very beginning of it was illegal. This is not the case. The ban has come into place now. Before the ban, the entry of such aircraft were possible. So it was not void ab initio. Is it void? No, it's not void. A void contract is a contract that has no legal existence. It is not void. What is this contract? This is contract which has become frustrated. How? Has the performance become impossible or has it become illegal? It has become illegal. Impossible? No, because you can still commit a illegal act. So an illegal act is still possible, but illegal act is illegal. Okay, if I've confused you, just because the Directorate General of Civil Aviation has imposed a ban, it cannot be said that the contract has become impossible. It has just become illegal, and still it has gotten frustrated nonetheless. So the right answer is D. Any doubt? Advait, Pratiksha, Nishka, you have your hands up. Is that for a doubt or you forgot to lower them?
I forgot to
Got
lower
to.
it. Sorry.
No problem. Coming to question number 3.2. The right answer to 3.1 was D. These are two very close options. So you have to be mindful whether you are choosing B or you are choosing D. And there is a very good reason why D should be chosen, because it is talking about legality and not possibility. Possibility is something that we have discarded in the earlier answer. So the only thing that we will talk about is legality. Now that the DGCA order has become advisory in nature, that is, we are not really bound by it. It is not illegal to get these aircrafts in India, and hence the contract is not frustrated. Now, even if all the other airlines are maintaining good relations and all, that is not really relevant, because it's unlike other earlier situation where the costs have become prohibitively high and when the contention was related to force majeure. Here we are only considered about frustration of a contract. So frustration of a contract is a higher standard. So in this case, the contract is not frustrated. So D is the right answer. Coming to question number 3.3. Okay, the right answer to 3.3 is B. The contract is not frustrated since the decision of the DGCA does not hit at the root of the contract. Why does not it hit on the root of the contract? The root of the contract is the import of certain aircrafts in India. The aircrafts in India can be is still imported even if with a higher tax burden. So the root of the contract is not affected, or even if it is affected, it is not hit. By hitting, we means just making it go away, extinct, or anything. That is what is the meaning of hit in this sense. So since it does not stay at the root of the contract is not frustrated. Question number 3.4. Okay, I'll not ask you to answer 3.4 because uh, it was in the last part of the passage. It was mentioned that where a contract is rendered commercially impossible in a legal sense, then the contract will be considered to have been frustrated. But that is a very fine line, and that is something that you cannot determine. It really depends on the facts of the case, and to expect you to solve 3.4 in the limited facts, with this limited facts, impossible to solve 3.4. So ironically, or somehow, even this question 3.4 is frustrated. So let's move to question 3.5. So remember, in answering 3.5, wherever there is an unreasonable delay, the contract is said to be frustrated. So the only thing that you have to determine is whether this delay was reasonable. The delay of 1 year, was it reasonable or not? Okay. So in this case, because there was a hurricane, the delay was reasonable. The delay had an underlying reason, and hence the contract is not frustrated. Had the delay been unreasonable from the other side, the delay could have been could have hit at the root of the contract, thus or thereby frustrating the contract. But in this case, since the delay was reasonable, the performance of the contract will not be discharged and the contract will not be frustrated. Yes, Nishka, you've come online. Is there a doubt?
No, I figured it out.
Okay.
I thought I had a doubt, but I just got it.
No problem. It's good to have you online. Is there anyone who has any doubt so far? We will still be doing the last passage in the next 9 minutes. So you got around 3 minutes or 2 minutes to read this. It's 6:51. You have until 6:53 to read this. Okay, last 30 seconds. Okay, so the passage talks about the concept of a floor test and the concept of no confidence. Uh, what is the difference between the two things? The concept of no confidence is that when the opposing party believes that the government does not enjoy the support of the majority of the members of the house, they can bring in a motion of no confidence. In order for the motion of no confidence to sustain, there should be more votes in its favor than against it. So let's say there is a 300 member house and I bring in a motion of confidence. I should have 151 people who should vote in favor of no confidence motion. Once 151 people votes in the favor of no confidence motion, the government falls and fresh elections are held. On the other hand, floor test is a process where the government proves its majority in the house, where it has to prove that more than 150 people are in favor of its government. So it will look like the same thing to you. But and this is a big but, what will happen in case where two parties have 140 each in a 300 member house and there are 20 MLAs who does not support any of the faction? Now this becomes really important, and this came in light during the Madhya Pradesh episode in March 2020, where what happened was there was a Kamal Nath government and Shivraj Singh Chauhan was attempting a coup. So obviously with the help of Jyotiraditya Scindia and 23 other people. So Shivraj Singh Chauhan kept on asking for the Kamal Nath government to prove its majority on the house through how will they prove the majority in the house? Through a floor test. Whereas the Kamal Nath government kept on saying that we have the requisite majority, but you think if we do not have the majority, bring in a no confidence motion. Why was both of them doing that? Because the situation was something like this. Both of them had 140 MLA each, and there were 20 MLA who were not supporting anyone. So if Kamal Nath brings in the motion to get himself floor tested, he'll not get 151 people. Whereas similarly, if Shivraj Singh Chauhan brings in a motion of no confidence, he cannot get it 151 people to sign it. So that was the difficulty that both of them were facing. And hence, no confidence motion did come eventually, but it came, oh, in fact, the motion of no confidence never came. It was the governor ordering the government to prove its majority on the House through a system of floor test, where it became necessary for Kamal Nath to have more votes in his favor than against. So this was the simple logic between no confidence motion and a floor test. Now the passage talks to you about the technicalities of bringing a no confidence motion. In a no confidence motion, you have to seek the leave of the speaker. Leave just means permission of the speaker. And how does the permission of the speaker is sought? One, it has to be procedurally proper. There is a specific format in which it should be drafted. Once it is done, then the other thing that there should be 10% of the members of the House, that is at least 30 people, should support it. Only then there is a permission to debate this thing on the floor of the House. But then there is a period of 10 days after the no confidence motion is brought for the government to try and to get its MLA and House in order and everything else. And then the passage goes on to discuss the difference between a floor test and a no confidence motion. Now, I don't think we have sufficient time to deal with this question, and I also think this is a slightly technical thing. So you should really attempt these 6 questions at your convenience as homework and verify these answers from the answer key that will be sent to you over email. Is there any doubt in this passage or in any of the other passages that we have done? Yes, Advait.
So can you first of all, can you send this on? Can you send like the document on the chat box so we can go through those questions?
Yeah, sure. Just give me a moment. Yes. Meanwhile, while I am sending it, does anyone have any other doubt?
I have a doubt in.
I have a doubt.
Okay. Please raise your hands since there are multiple doubts. I'll take them one by one. Whoever has doubt, please raise your hand. Only 2 of you. Guys, whoever has any doubt, please raise your hand. Any doubt, any kind of question? This is your opportunity, please. Okay, no one seems to be interested. Okay, guys, you can leave the class. It's 6:59 now, and you can stay if you wish. And people who have doubt can ask me. We'll keep on with this session. I'll just stop the recording. Just give me a moment.